Justice wears a suit now. That's not just a phrase, it's a shift, a reality check. For too long, the image of justice was clouded by ideals, by statues holding scales, by slogans etched into marble. But now, justice walks into courtrooms wearing black robes and briefcases. It types late into the night under flickering lights. It speaks in precise language, backed not by emotion, but by evidence. This new face of justice doesn't shout, it builds, it drafts. It files motions that shake nations. All across the world, lawyers have stepped into a role that many thought belonged to activists or politicians. But here's the truth. Laws are written by governments, yes, but they are interpreted, argued, and held accountable by those who understand them best. The legal profession has now become the last line of defense for those whose rights have been stripped, whose voices have been silenced. In Palestine, that truth has never been more urgent. In every courtroom filing, in every legal challenge, there is an echo of the cries that never made the news. In every drafted brief, there's a story the world tried to ignore. But these lawyers, these men and women from every corner of the globe, they're not looking away. They're not asking for permission. They're taking the law, international law, human rights law, constitutional law, and they're using it the way it was meant to be used, to defend the defenseless. When justice wears a suit, it no longer waits for politics to catch up. It doesn't seek popularity, it seeks principle. Lawyers are now calling out war crimes, building cases in real time, and holding powerful regimes accountable in international courts. And they're not doing it for cameras or crowds. They're doing it because somewhere deep inside, they remember what law is supposed to be. A force that protects, not just punishes. It's not glamorous work. It's not always safe, but it's real, and that reality is now putting pressure where it hurts, on those who thought they could act without consequence, because now the consequence is legal and the world is watching. The suit isn't about style. It's about seriousness. It's about walking into a system designed to maintain order and demanding that order include the oppressed. It's about entering institutions that were once silent and filling them with the sound of truth. Justice wears a suit now, and it's just getting started. Silence is no longer an option. Not when the world watches children buried under rubble. Not when entire families disappear, not into history, but into dust and statistics. There comes a time when staying quiet becomes complicity, when neutrality becomes a shield for injustice. That time has passed. We're living in a moment where every voice matters, and every silence echoes louder than any spoken word. Injustice doesn't wait. It doesn't pause for politics, for negotiations, or for comfort. It keeps moving, unless someone stands in its way. For decades, the suffering of the Palestinian people has been met with silence from those who could have spoken. Organizations stayed quiet. Leaders tiptoed. Media outlets softened language, twisted context, and hid behind objectivity while entire communities were erased. But now, the silence is cracking, and what's emerging from those cracks is a wave of people who have had enough. Lawyers, students, artists, everyday citizens, they're all refusing to bite their tongues. They're refusing to let history be rewritten by those who benefit from its distortion. Speaking out is no longer radical. It's necessary. To remain silent in the face of genocide, occupation, and state-sponsored violence is to choose the side of the oppressor, and the world is waking up to that. People are realizing that silence doesn't protect peace, it preserves oppression. And so, the voices are rising. On social media, in the streets, and now, most powerfully, in the courtroom. Legal professionals who once focused on contracts and corporations are now drafting war crime cases and bringing human rights violations to international tribunals. The shift is undeniable. Law students are refusing to attend lectures that ignore international crimes. Human rights organizations are stepping beyond cautious statements. Legal experts are calling it what it is: ethnic cleansing, apartheid, crimes against humanity. And with every word they speak, they're filling the void that silence left behind. The truth is, silence was never neutral. It was always a luxury of those unaffected. But the legal world can no longer afford that luxury. Because when laws are used to justify injustice, only the brave can use the same laws to fight back. And to do that, you must speak. You must challenge. You must risk. The ones who dare to raise their voices now aren't just shouting into the void. They're breaking barriers. They're challenging systems. They're exposing the hypocrisy that's been dressed up as diplomacy for far too long. And they're doing it with facts, with law, with evidence, and with an unshakable moral compass. History will remember the ones who stayed quiet, but it will also remember those who stood up, who spoke out, and who refused to let silence be mistaken for peace. Because this is not the time for politeness. It's the time for truth, and truth has always made the powerful uncomfortable. Silence is no longer an option, because the cost of silence is too high, and the time for justice is now. Courtrooms become battlefields for truth. Not with weapons, not with soldiers, but with words, with evidence, with the undeniable power of law. In this war for justice, the fight isn't happening in the streets alone. It's unfolding under fluorescent lights, behind wooden benches, in front of judges who can no longer ignore the weight of what's being presented to them. This is where the truth walks in, not as a protester, not as a victim, but as a case file, as a precedent, as a declaration that even the most powerful must one day answer. The courtroom has always been a place of power, but now it's being reclaimed, not for the elite, not for the privileged, but for the oppressed. The legal system, once used to justify occupation, silence dissent, and sidestep accountability, is being forced to confront its own reflection. And it's doing so through the relentless efforts of legal teams who have had enough of watching the law be twisted against the very people it was meant to protect. These courtrooms are now hosting the voices of the silenced, the testimonies of the broken. The stories that were never meant to be heard are now becoming evidence, and that evidence is cutting through the noise. In every session, in every hearing, in every written argument, there's a battle happening. Battle to pull truth out from under decades of denial and distortion. Lawyers are entering these spaces like warriors, armed not with aggression, but with clarity, with dates, with satellite images, with human rights reports. They are speaking the language of law, because they know that to win in this arena, emotion isn't enough. Righteous anger won't move a judge, but irrefutable proof, that changes everything. And these lawyers are not just building cases, they are building history. In these courtrooms, double standards are being exposed. The same laws that were once applied selectively are now being thrown back at the system. If justice is to mean anything, it must be consistent. And now, the system is being tested. International laws are being cited, war crimes are being named, and those who thought they'd never be touched by justice are finding themselves under its microscope. There is no more hiding behind borders, no more pretending that distance means innocence. These legal proceedings are crossing continents, linking hands across cultures and countries, and forcing the world to look at what it tried to ignore. And this time, the court is not a shield, it's a spotlight. Every piece of evidence submitted is a strike against impunity. Every witness heard is a voice that refuses to be buried. These courtrooms may not make headlines every day, but they are where history is being reshaped, quietly, methodically, powerfully. And it's not just lawyers who are watching. The people are watching too. Survivors, youth, the global community, because they know that these trials, these hearings, these legal showdowns, they're about more than legal jargon. They're about truth finally having its day, not in the court of public opinion, but in the court of law. Courtrooms become battlefields for truth, And in this war, justice is finally learning how to fight back. Global lawyers unite for justice. It's not just a slogan. It's a movement, a rising tide of legal minds who have chosen to cross borders, break silence, and challenge power in the name of truth. From every corner of the world, they are coming together, not because of politics, not because of profit, but because they recognize something bigger than themselves. The shared responsibility to defend human dignity. The law, once viewed as a tool of control, is being transformed into a weapon of resistance. And the ones wielding it, they're not politicians or generals, they're lawyers, advocates, defenders of what is right. In times of crisis, the world looks to its leaders. But when leadership fails, it is the people. The thinkers, the doers, the ones who still believe in right and wrong, who must rise. That's what we're seeing today. Legal experts from South Africa, Ireland, Turkey, the United States, Malaysia, and beyond are forming coalitions, drafting petitions, and launching international legal actions against war crimes and systemic injustice. Their mission is clear: hold those in power accountable, no matter how high they sit or how deep they hide. These aren't ordinary lawyers. They are professors, international law scholars, former prosecutors, human rights defenders. They're refusing to stay in their lanes, refusing to allow borders to define their empathy. When a child is bombed in Gaza, they feel it in The Hague. When a hospital is targeted, they speak about it in Geneva. Because justice has no nationality and oppression has no justification. What makes this moment powerful is the unity. Lawyers who have never met, working on different continents, building the same case. They are sharing resources, testimony, legal strategies. They are organizing international panels, submitting cases to the International Criminal Court, and challenging the silence of global institutions. And with every motion filed, every case opened, they are making one thing very clear: the law belongs to the people, not the powerful. This unity is rooted in principle, not politics. Many of these lawyers come from systems that once stood silent or complicit in other human rights violations. But now, they are using those very systems to bring change. They are not afraid of being unpopular. They are not afraid of backlash, because they know that the price of silence is always paid by the innocent. These lawyers are not naive. They understand how slow the wheels of justice turn. They know how power manipulates process. But they also know that once a case is built, once the truth is recorded, it cannot be undone. Even if justice is delayed, it will not be erased. And that is their mission, to make sure the world cannot look away. The power of this movement lies in its diversity, different languages, different legal systems, different backgrounds, but one goal: justice, and in that goal, they find unity, strength, and unstoppable momentum. Global lawyers unite for justice, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Because in a world that often rewards silence, they've chosen to speak. And in a system built on power, they've chosen to defend the powerless. That choice is changing everything. Legal evidence versus political narratives. That's the real fight unfolding right now. For years, the world has been fed carefully crafted stories, narratives wrapped in diplomacy, softened by language, and filtered through media lenses that choose comfort over truth. But those days are fading, because evidence doesn't bend. Evidence doesn't care about political alliances, economic interests, or PR spin. Evidence speaks plainly, and now the evidence is stacking up. Reports, witness statements, photos, videos, timelines, thousands of pages, hours of footage, countless testimonies. It's all there, laid out with precision and clarity, and it's starting to drown out the noise. Political narratives rely on confusion, on deflection, on the idea that the truth is too complex to understand, but legal evidence simplifies. It says, here's what happened, here's when it happened, here's who did it, and here's what the law says about it. That's power. That's what makes the legal system so dangerous to those who have hidden behind vague statements and diplomatic immunity for so long. In the case of Palestine, the gap between narrative and evidence is staggering. Political voices say conflict, but the evidence says occupation. They say self-defense, but the forensic reports say targeted strikes on civilians. They say unintentional, but satellite data shows deliberate patterns. The truth has always been there, but now it's organized, it's documented, and it's walking straight into international courtrooms with purpose. What's happening is a shift. No longer is the world satisfied with statements of concern. Now the question is, what do the facts say? What does the law say? And those facts, those hard, uncomfortable truths, are being presented by lawyers, investigators, and legal scholars who understand the power of precision. They know that while political narratives change with the wind, evidence is permanent. It can be cross-examined, it can be verified, and once it's in the record, it stays. This legal battle is not just about exposing crimes. It's about challenging the way the world has been trained to perceive them. For decades, the suffering of Palestinians has been dismissed, minimized, or framed as complicated. But legal evidence strips away that smokescreen. It removes the emotion, the bias, the politics, and replaces it with facts. Names, dates, statutes violated, human rights breached. That's how justice begins, not with outrage, but with truth that can't be denied. Of course, the political machine is fighting back. They're calling it biased. They're attacking the credibility of the courts. They're doubling down on their narratives, but it's too late. The truth has entered the room. And the room is a courtroom where narrative holds no weight without proof. Lawyers around the world are building their cases with discipline and care. They're not shouting, they're documenting, they're not debating opinions. They're collecting evidence that meets the highest standard, the legal standard, and that's what makes this moment different. It's not just emotional, it's legal, and that makes it dangerous to those who have relied on vague narratives to escape accountability. Legal evidence versus political narratives. This is the turning point. Because once the truth is proven, it no longer matters who controls the story. The story belongs to justice now. The legal uprising has begun, not with protests in the streets or slogans painted on walls, but in quiet rooms where lawyers gather, in court filings submitted with precision, in international petitions that refuse to be ignored. What we're witnessing isn't just outrage, it's strategy. It's not just passion, it's purpose. For years, justice felt out of reach. For too long, the cries of the oppressed were drowned out by politics and power. But now, the system that once ignored them is being forced to respond. And the ones leading this charge are not warriors with weapons, but professionals with law degrees, research, and an unshakable sense of duty. This uprising is global, but its target is specific: impunity. The kind of impunity that allows powerful states to act without consequence. The kind of impunity that buries war crimes beneath bureaucracy. But that era is ending. Slowly, methodically, and with undeniable force, the legal world is rising to meet this moment. From The Hague to human rights commissions, from local legal networks to international courts, lawyers are mobilizing. They're filing cases, exposing double standards, challenging outdated narratives, and demanding accountability for every violation of international law. This movement isn't built on rage, it's built on evidence. On timelines, on witness statements, on legal definitions so clear they cut through even the most carefully constructed political defenses. And it's not just the seasoned professionals taking a stand. Young lawyers, law students, and legal scholars are joining the fight. They are rejecting silence. They are rethinking what it means to be a lawyer in times of moral crisis. And they are choosing courage over comfort, truth over tradition. What makes this uprising so powerful is its coordination. It's not impulsive, it's not fragmented, it's a network, a growing alliance of legal minds working across time zones, languages, and legal systems. They're not just filing cases, they're rewriting how law is used. They're reclaiming justice from the hands of the powerful and giving it back to the people who need it most. That's the real revolution, using the law not as a tool of control, but as a vehicle for liberation. This uprising is not just against injustice, it's against the normalization of injustice, against the idea that some lives are worth more than others, against the quiet assumption that international law only applies when it's convenient. These lawyers are making it inconvenient. They're challenging the world to look at what it allowed, what it ignored, what it denied. And they're doing it with facts, with statutes, with courtrooms that can no longer look away. The legal uprising has begun, and it's not stopping. It's gaining speed, it's gathering strength, and it's sending a message to the world that justice delayed will no longer be justice denied.